Have you ever wondered what the most brutal execution in history was? Well, look no further because today we're going to delve into the gruesome and cruel methods used during the Middle Ages as a means of capital punishment. From being hanged, drawn, or quartered, to being burned at the stake, to crushing and boiling someone alive, these forms of executions will make you grateful for living in the present day. So buckle up and prepare yourself for a shocking journey through history as we uncover the dark side of punishment during the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages saw a significant increase in the use of public executions as a method of meting out punishment to criminals. It was a common practice to carry out these executions in public as a means of discouraging individuals from committing crimes and particular offenses. People could be put to death for a wide variety of offenses, ranging from the relatively minor offense of coin clipping to more serious offenses such as committing treason and plotting to kill the monarch. Even the relatively minor offense of coin clipping was considered a capital offense. Treasonous individuals were frequently subjected to England's particularly gruesome form of execution, which consisted of being hanged, drawn, and quartered. This form of execution was often reserved for those who were found guilty of treason. The condemned would be publicly humiliated while tied to the back of a horse and then paraded through the streets. They would then be taken to the gallows, where they would be hanged by an executioner until they were very close to passing out, at which point they would be cut down. After that, their genitalia would be cut away and their internal organs removed before being set ablaze in front of them. At the end of it all, they would be cut into 4 parts, beheaded, and the various components of their bodies dismembered and distributed throughout the nation at the request of the monarchy. It was a common practice during the Middle Ages to put criminals to death by setting them on fire and driving a stake through their chests. This method of execution was frequently connected to religious offenses, such as heresy. Burning at the stake was a common method of execution during the time of the Spanish Inquisition, and Joan of Arc is one of the most famous people to have been subjected to this form of death. The accused person would first be bound to a stake in front of a large crowd, and then burned alive after being set ablaze. Some people who carried out executions would try to ease the victim's pain by suffocating them with a small bag of gunpowder that would then explode when the bag caught fire. In general, the justice of the Middle Ages was harsh and unforgiving. It placed a heavy emphasis on the use of public executions as a means of discouraging people from committing crimes in the first place. These executions frequently involved gruesome and horrifying practices that were intended to strike fear into the hearts of the population and discourage individuals from engaging in criminal behavior. Those who have been found guilty of crimes considered to be particularly heinous by society have been subjected to a variety of forms of capital punishment throughout history. These methods were frequently cruel and gruesome, leaving witnesses traumatized by the sight of the gruesome spectacle they witnessed. One of the methods used for execution was beheading, which Henry VIII famously used to decapitate 2 of his queens, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. Beheading was associated with witchcraft and treason. Throughout many centuries, public beheadings were considered a form of entertainment for the masses. Those sentenced to death would be transported to a predetermined location where an axe murderer would wait for them. They would be accompanied by a priest throughout the process, and prior to their beheadings being placed on the block, they would be given the option of wearing a blindfold. Some skilled executioners could sever a head with a single blow, while others would take multiple blows, thereby extending the agony of the person being put to death. Crushing or pressing victims to death was another cruel method of execution used during the medieval period. Margaret Clavero, who was brutally crushed in front of a large crowd in York, is the subject of one of the most notable cases to come out of the United Kingdom. She was forced to lie down on a bridge, and then a stone was placed on her back. After that, a door was brought forward, and 700 additional pounds of weight were added. Clavero's agonizing and drawn-out passing took place over the course of 15 minutes. Although drowning was not common as other forms of capital punishment, such as beheading or crushing, it was also a method of execution. George Plantagenet, the brother of King Edward IV, was found dead inside the Tower of London, having drowned in a barrel of Malmsey wine. This was one of the more notable cases. The guards would frequently extend the suffering of those condemned by removing them from the water just moments before they would pass away. An additional gruesome method of execution, dating back to the time of the Roman Empire, is the practice of boiling someone to death. King Henry VIII famously had a cook named Richard Roots boiled to death after accusing him to trying to kill Bishop John Fisher with poison. The person would be dunked in and out of a large container filled with wax, water, oil, or even molten lead until they died. The agony of some victims was prolonged by the fact that they were placed in the container before it had even reached boiling temperature. At times, the process could be very slow, and some victims would even choose to dunk their heads under the water to hasten their demise. In contrast to the gruesome punishment of being hanged, drawn, and quartered, women were usually spared the latter two methods and were simply hanged. The executions were public events that drew large crowds, with many being hanged at the same time on the same gallows. While public hangings were common in the medieval period, they eventually became more private in later centuries. Another brutal method of punishment was dribbling, where criminals were locked in human-shaped cages and suspended high above the public as a warning to others. Some were executed before being displayed, while others were left to die from exposure and starvation. The victims would slowly waste away, with passerbys witnessing their gradual demise. Giblets were also used to display corpses, but the contraption trapped someone with no way out. While gibbeting was not as frequent as some may believe, the smell of a rotting corpse 30 feet in the air would have been unbearable. Over time, birds and insects would pick at the remains. Flaying was yet another gruesome execution method that involved removing a person's skin while they were still alive. The amount of skin removed determined whether the person would be executed or simply tortured. It was a commonly used form of torture and execution for centuries, with death being resulting from shock and blood loss caused by brutal cuts. Vlad III, also known as Vlad the Impaler, was a prince who ruled Wallachia, a region in present-day Romania. During the 15th century, he was notorious for his cruelty, particularly in his bloodlust, and his favored method of execution. It was this method that earned him his infamous nickname. Vlad the Impaler's preferred method of execution was to impale his victims with wooden stakes. The stakes were usually inserted through the anus or vagina, and then driven through the body until they emerged from the mouth or shoulder. This excruciating method of torture could last for hours, if not days, and it was said that Vlad often took pleasure in watching his victims suffer. To make matters worse, many of the stakes used by Vlad were purposely blunted to prolong the agony of his victims. It is believed that Vlad used impalement as a means of terrorizing his enemies and consolidating his power. His cruelty was not limited to impalement, as he was known to engage in other forms of torture and violence as well. It is estimated that Vlad the Impaler was responsible for the deaths of up to 20,000 people during his reign. Despite his brutality, Vlad is still celebrated as a hero by some in Romania for his resistance against the Ottoman Empire. However, his legacy as a ruthless and sadistic ruler has endured through the centuries, and his name has become synonymous with terror and violence. As we conclude our exploration of the most brutal executions in history, it's clear that the methods used to punish those found guilty of heinous crimes were often brutal and horrifying, from burning at the stake to beheading, crushing, drowning, boiling, and more. The forms of execution used throughout history were truly barbaric. If you found this video informative, please consider sharing it with others and subscribing to our channel for more thought-provoking content.